Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1, Episode 5 of Sprung. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So, a lot of the groundwork is being laid out for their heist against the Congresswoman, so they need to get the painting. They're going to swap it for a forgery, and they're going to get Jack's mom to do it, which Jack is not too keen on the fact of making his mom responsible for a crime, especially with the whole situation of Gloria say, like, hey, even if they do find out, they probably won't find out until they sell it in, like, maybe 20 years. It's like, you're probably not going to be lucky enough for that to be happening. It's probably most likely going to happen even sooner. Maybe not. With the ending of the episode, we'll kind of talk about that later, but... And it's like, oh, how old is your mom? It's like, oh, she's like 60-something. She's like, oh, I don't have to say it. It's like, Gloria's like, no, you don't have to say it. I mean, she's like, if you know what I mean, Gloria's like, we know what you mean, Barb. It's like, just saying, she's gonna die is what I'm trying to say. It's like, we get it, Barb. I was like, you could have stopped multiple times. We told you multiple times to stop, but you didn't. Even asking at one point in time, I was like, oh, how old is your dad? It's just like, we're not going down this route again, Barb. I should have started off by saying I really like when storytelling is done the way this episode was, where it's like, right, obviously, like, multiple, like, rewinding so you can find out what other characters were up to when you weren't seeing them all the time. Like, you get an episode from different characters' perspectives. I would say that's such an interesting storytelling mechanic for a story. I think that's always so interesting. I'm like, oh yeah, these stories happen like parallel. I was about to go on a tangent, but I won't. Either way. So while they're, still planning everything out, you have like Barb still dealing with like the soda stream situation. I'm like, I guess she just like soda streams. I'm like, I guess you just keep carbonating something over and over. Because even to the point, like, Jack tried to drink it later on, he was just like, oh my god, it, like, stings your tongue. She even said that she likes that, but, like, now she's all gassy. She's got Rooster standing on her back, and she's like, yeah, it needs to come out one hole or another. So... and we find out later on Barb stole the soda stream from the neighbor Sylvia, which I'm like... Oh, I was like, to be fair, they set that up in the first episode that her and Rooster, like, steal packages from people, like, all the time, so that should come as no surprise. But I love the reason why Sylvia, like, she saw Barb's, like, door closing just when it's like, package, it just said, like, the package got delivered, I don't see my soda stream. It's like, Barb, I know you had something to do with it. And then she was at the bank when Barb was there, and when she burped, she's like, bubbles. It's like, okay, so that's all you needed to know that she stole your soda stream. I even love that. I don't know why. I really love the whole thing because she kicks her shoe off. It's like, oh, officer, can you pick that up? Hands it to her, and she throws it because it's like, yeah, I'm not about to bend over to get my shoe. I don't know why that got me for whatever reason. But I love they were able to kind of resolve it by her just being like, Gloria being like, oh, we must have gotten it by accident. I didn't really look at the packaging, so here's your soda stream back, but also I'm going to keep that shoe, which I love that ties into the credit sequence where, like, she busts into Barb's place and, like, starts tearing apart. I was like, Sylvia, that's super jacked up. I'm like, what are you looking for? And it's like, she's shaking all the boxes and she finds her shoe. I was like, oh, that's what it's about. And then she put everything back. I was like, oh, wow. I was like, that's super nice of you. I mean, I guess it's like, well, it's mainly because you don't want them to know that someone was there, because it's like, right, if she finds out her place is trash, she'll most likely retaliate against you, so maybe that was just for her. But it's just the fact that she did that, and, like, they show some of the sequence of her, like, putting stuff way back way it was and folding up, like, blankets and stuff. I was like, wow. I was like, are you just, like, kind of nice because you kind of felt bad? So, well, I got my shoe, let me clean the place up. Or is it just self-preservation that you're like, right, I don't want her to know I busted in her place. And she might end up finding out later on regardless, just like you randomly found out about her stealing your soda stream. So, there's all of that. There's a whole situation with Rooster, who's still trying to make things work with, Wiggles, and it's like, and it's like, yeah, Melva's in jail. It's like, well, Melva's in jail because you framed or you set him up. And he's like, no, I didn't. I was like, wait, I was like, does Melva know? But I'm like, all right, the whole point was to make it Rooster's knife is what's in his tire, so he doesn't know that Jack like set him up. That was actually Jack's plan and everything, but it's just like it's all on Rooster. So like if Melvin ever gets out, he's going to beat the ever living shit out of Rooster, which kind of wanted Jack to do last episode. But either way. But he's like, he went on that diatribe of like, oh yeah, like the truth is not what you think the truth is, because you really don't know the truth about the whole thing. And she's like, did you actually say the word truth that many times, or is it just from my concussion of like hitting the floor of the bus like that? He's like, no, I said truth that many times. I actually kind of confusing myself, by saying that too, but it's like, right, Melvin's in jail, I'm here, like, you said you wanted someone that, wouldn't be locked up in jail, but I'm here. But for her, it's like, no, like, you don't ever... you never make decisions for yourself. You let other people decide for you, because he wants to tell Wiggles the truth about the Congresswoman deal, which he doesn't, because everyone tells him not to. And still kind of doing the whole thing of like, right, he does what everyone tells him, including his mom. Like his mom, he chose his mom over Wiggles, and she still feels that, And the sad thing is, and I'm like, I hope, she probably never went to the hospital, but it's like, that persisted a little too long in the episode. No, like her just being like, kind of a little dizzy and kind of forgetting, like, it comes up later on. I think she was at the strip club too, when that happened, and I was like, oh, like, I hope she goes to the hospital to get checked out, because it seemed like, but later on she seems fine, so maybe like, oh, maybe it finally did kind of wear off, but you're still like, I'm kind of worried for her. But either way, Rooster's plan to really get Wiggles back is to basically neg her. It's like, oh, pretend like, oh, you don't care about her, you've moved on, but she's like, I'm not an idiot. You think I wouldn't figure out what you were trying to do? Like going to the strip club and like asking for other dancers, but it's also like, you were basically looking at a picture of me on your phone while they were dancing. It's like, oh, dude, that's it. I mean, there's an element of sweetness to it, but it's also very sad. You can't even, I mean, he even said it himself. He's like, it's just not, he's like, not being handsome, that's impossible. Being handsome is an easy thing to do, but being mean to someone is not. And it's like, truth be told, it makes sense. I mean, he is like a very like go-lucky character, and like Rooster just seems like a nice guy to his core. I mean, he's like your lovable idiot. I mean, he kind of gets it from his mom, because she, she's not as lovable, but she's lovable in her own way, so. And I thought Rooster was going to tell Wiggles about the plan, but instead, what he ended up doing was singing to her, because he's like, oh, it sounds terrible to me, which I was like, oh, because I was like, oh, is it going to be like really bad? But it's like, no, like, oh my God, he can sing, and she got swept up in a moment. It's like, oh, okay, you sung to her instead of telling her the plan, so that worked out. And they were doing their thing, which I love. He's like, yo, I had to come back home, had to rinse off, some romance. And it's like, nobody needs to hear that. At the same time, we find about Gloria's been the one that's kind of like getting on everyone about like, wait, because we got to do this now, because if we don't strike now, it's going to be months before we have an opportunity to strike again. So like, so they have to kind of make the best of this opportunity. And throughout the entire thing, Gloria is trying to reach out to her Fitz, but he kind of wants nothing to do with her, which understandable. It's like, right, you're in prison. How'd you get out? Only people who typically get out. I guess it's like maybe just, at this point, it's like not well known that like some criminals, in the confines of the story, it must not be well known that like maybe it's only this particular town and prison that did that. Maybe it hasn't like been all across the U.S. necessarily. So he didn't buy the story that like, wait, you got released because of COVID. So every time she tried to call him, he's thinking like, oh, you're trying to set me up. He's like, I'm running a legitimate business. And that's the thing, because Gloria, and she even talks about it later on, which I thought was kind of interesting, where it's like, for so long, she ended up running things on her own. I mean, to be fair, like, we learned about her operations last episode, so all she ever did was work on her own. So being part of a team and relying on other people, it's not something she's really comfortable with, because she's used to doing things on her own. And now it's like, right, now she has to rely on other people to do their part. But the sad thing is, she's kind of their undoing to some extent, because like, all right, everything else is in place, except for the fact is that my fence won't come through. And the moment the police got involved because of Sylvia, so Barb did kind of screw things up to the most part, because she's the one that didn't pay like the parking tickets, because she was like, yeah, it's register my grandma. They want the $27. They can go dig her up to get it. And then the cop helping the whole Sylvia thing, he ended up scaring the fence off James that Gloria was on the phone with. So that kind of screw the pooch. And he walked by the back of her vehicle, and it showed like, oh, like all these parking tickets. She probably is like, yeah, it's my grandmother's vehicle, but it's probably like, so she probably won't suffer any ramifications for that because it will all fall back on her grandmother. But it's like, cool, they lost their car that they're going to need for the robbery. So it's like, you can make the argument it's kind of all on Barb. She's the one that stole the Soda Stream in the first place. And I mean, I guess you could also make the argument of like if she actually had a credit card, well, money in her account. But the reason why she doesn't have money in her account is because she avoids going to the bank because Stan's at the bank. So, but speaking of Gloria, there is the whole her and Jack thing because Jack's feeling a little awkward about the whole situation of like, oh, he does like Gloria, but she made it clear to Barb last episode, like, he's too clingy, and if we hook up, it's also because like everything between them was kind of based on lies. So when his mom did do the forgery, and because he was like, oh, it's for my girlfriend Gloria, she put it on the back like, oh, my love Gloria, love Jack, XOXO or something like that. So all right, because his mom, I also love that line of Jack's like, oh yeah, my mom says she have it done in lickety split, and Barb's like, wait, isn't that? Aren't you? Does she really know what that means? He's like, yeah, it means to have something done quickly. And she's like, oh, I know it means going down on someone when you're licking there. And Gloria's like, no, that is super not what that means. She's like, well, agree to disagree. It's like, no, I mean Now that can be the new meaning to lickety split. That could be like the Urban Dictionary, like new age definition of it. I mean, not unless that already is. I mean, I get the feeling like that could already be like the subtext definition for that. But I also love the reveal of Jack's side of things because his mom and dad were complaining. Well, the fact is his mom was like, yeah, no one can really get out because they have to stay locked up because of the virus. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of driving everyone a little insane. It's like your dad is using that thing to kind of listen up to a neighbor. It's like that neighbor died like 5 months ago, and I guess she just didn't have the heart to tell him because it's like, right, it's something that he kind of looks forward to, and it's just like, right, I don't want to kind of take that from him, or he's going a little stir crazy, and I'm gonna leave him be. But I love Jack buying the like little hamster balls from the strip club, which I love that was their way around it. I mean, they're illegally picking up people on the bus to kind of keep things going, but in the club, they keep things open because it was like, right, don't worry, like our strippers are wrapped. So they're in bubbles, but also the strippers. Because like I love that at one point, Wiggles, hers busted because she was like, yeah, the guy had like keys in his pocket or something. That's what I was also trying to understand. Like, do they both put on the bubbles, or does like one of them get out of the bubble while the other one stays in there? I'm assuming she stays in it, and then the customer can get out. But then later on, around in that same scene, Rooster went in the back, but he was still wearing the bubble, so not let you take it off back there and then like during the private area because it's closed off or something. I thought that was just an interesting way to go about that. It's like, yeah, I mean, everyone had to find their way through the pandemic, especially at that early time of it, finding a way to keep their businesses afloat. So do what you got to do, hustle, right? I even love Jack stealing the bus by pretending to be like a health and safety inspector. It's like, oh, bringing back that red shirt. That's like, oh, you could be an exterminator, kind of using that in this regard. I thought it was kind of neat taking the bus that way. But him buying because they had to shut down the club because they couldn't do it without the bubbles anymore. But that's because Jack ended up buying all of them, and he sent them over to his mom and dad's like assistant living home. And I love that whole thing. And she's like, okay, I'll leave the iPad here so you can watch us for as long as you want or until you get bored. And I was like, that's super sweet, And it's like always being able to keep a longer eye on your parents. Like that was like, oh, that's super, super sweet. I love it. And once again, just Jack continuing to do what he can, because not only did he help his parents, he also helped other people too. And I love his dad being like, oh yeah, that guy that I thought I was having a feud with is dead. It's like, oh, my condolences. Like, yeah, he was actually a good guy. It's like, you were complaining about him because you thought he was complaining about you. You were having a feud with a dead man for the past couple, I mean, however long you've been at that, so. I also love, too, that Rooster, because Jack was trying to find a flower shop on the phone because he's still trying to figure it all out, the digital agent stuff. And Rooster pulled up some porn. He's like, oh, like, do we have something that's not, like, about people being, like, related? I was like, oh, I mean, it makes sense because, you know, obviously, I mean, God, you'll find that information literally being like, oh, yeah, that step sibling stuff is kind of high rated. He's like, oh, I guess I shouldn't, you know, it's kind of, I kind of went 0 to 100, kind of take you into the deep end, you know, probably should have taught, kind of, Rooster should have, like, gave him kind of lobbed him a softball or something like that, so. But I also love that, Gloria kind of had no choice but to confide in Jack that her fence isn't coming through, so they need to find someone who they could hawk this painting to. But Jack's like, well, we'll find a way. Like, I do know a guy in prison who might have some connections, but it's like, we'll figure something out. We'll work together. Just like, you know, it's like, right, if there's an issue, you know, talk to me or whatever. Because he had said something to her about, and she was like, no, you can't use that against me. That's when you were... that's something we learned when we were talking to each other. That was kind of just in prison. And he's like, well, you kind of also lied to me. It's like, yeah, I lied, but you kind of also lied too about something that's pretty important and stuff like that. Considering, like, this is the job that, you know, if this goes sideways, we could all end up in prison. So it's kind of my life on the line in that regard. But it's like, hey, like, just going forward, like, we're a team. We're in this together. So, like, if there's ever a problem, like, talk to me. And she's like, yeah, I know. And I think... maybe, just looking at the thumbnail, I think that conversation is going to make her start looking at Jack in a different light to some extent. So we'll see how that plays out. But we get the interesting twist at the end that the moment Jack and them arrive at the house, sadly, the place is already being robbed. So my question then being like, okay, so did Rooster say something to Wiggles while they were doing their thing? I don't think he did, but that could have been something we didn't see. But then it's also more likely that maybe someone else was already keeping an eye on the place, so that's a strong possibility, or either the Congresswoman or her husband is planning this whole thing out. They set this whole thing in motion so they could be away from the house, because it's a, you know, that you happen to be robbed. And I guess it's like, right, Jack and them are trying to rob you while you're away from home, so someone else doing it too, using this as the perfect opportunity. I think it kind of speaks volumes. So I'm leaning more towards either it's someone else that was already keeping an eye on a place, already had surveillance on the Congresswoman, or her or her husband is trying to do like an insurance fraud type of situation. So it could be something of that ilk too. So it's definitely going to be interesting to find out what the hell that's all about. But I'm very interested to see where the next episode ends up taking us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.